Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 336, An Intro to Faith, Part 2. The power we accumulate when we increase our faith. The podcast objectives are analyze the role of faith in the overarching model of holiness, analyze the hierarchy of holiness, and analyze the importance in accumulating great power in the Spirit. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. The role of faith. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 73 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we executed a high-level introduction of faith, the degree which has been designed to defeat doubt in our minds. I would like to continue that train of thought by analyzing the role of faith in the overarching model of holiness. Along these lines, there are 64 degrees of holiness, just as there are 80 degrees of lawlessness. This is one of many witnesses to the superiority of holiness, for it only takes 64 degrees of holiness to defeat 80 degrees of lawlessness. Of the 64 degrees of holiness, 16 are primary degrees. These are all captured in the image to the left. To wit, all the degrees from faith to love are primary degrees of holiness. Going further, every primary degree of holiness is made up of 3 degrees. Here again, this is the same rule for the degrees of lawlessness, which speaks to the parallel nature of these spiritual orders. Along these lines, every primary degree of holiness has a fundamental degree, a focal degree, and a critical degree. And each of these degrees is designed specifically to defeat its corresponding degree of lawlessness at the detailed level. As it pertains to faith, it is superior to doubt, quite simply because its degrees are superior to the degrees of doubt. And I will show you this in future podcasts as we go line by line in revealing the process in which you defeat doubt once and for all and forever. The hierarchy of holiness. Now, to further understand the role of faith, we should consider the hierarchy of holiness, the same way we analyze the hierarchy of lawlessness in a prior podcast, vis-a-vis End Times 304, the 80 Degrees of Lawlessness, Part 1, which was posted on July 8th, 2024. To begin with, all the degrees of holiness have varying spiritual rankings and grades contingent to their relationships and their position within the validated model of the pinnacle of holiness, which is why it is line upon line and precept upon precept. Ergo, there is a spiritual science to the hierarchy of holiness, the same way there is a science to the hierarchy of lawlessness. And this science perfectly aligns every degree of these orders with their counterparts. For example, faith versus doubt. For that reason, I will present the 64 degrees of holiness in ascending order and according to their spiritual rankings. Nevertheless, I would remind you that spiritual rank does not translate into a universal assessment of difficulty. To wit, faith is not easier to master than love because it is at the foundation of the hierarchy and love is at the top. Quite the contrary, faith will present various challenges for many of us for the simple fact that the majority of our spiritual conflicts occur on the battlegrounds of faith. Not only this, but you must always remember how we are all unique. Therefore, the levels of holiness that may be difficult for me due to my default composition may not be as difficult for you. And thus, we must have the same mindset no matter what level or interval of holiness we are on. We must master each degree at all costs, understanding that our mastery of every degree of holiness is the only way we can eliminate every degree of lawlessness. First, we have the fundamental degrees of holiness. These 16 degrees, being situated at the foundation of the hierarchy, support all the other degrees of holiness. Ergo, they should not be taken lightly, for they are the life source of all the other degrees. And these are hope, compliance, honesty, value, consideration, intelligence, moderation, urgency, forbearance, happiness, calm, restoration, lowliness, concern, sympathy, and care. Next, we have the focal degrees of holiness. These 16 degrees are the focus of the hierarchy. To wit, these are the core spiritual forces which drive holiness in our beings, and they are the most similar to their primary degrees. These are trust, conformance, righteousness, reverence, understanding, judgment, constraint, perseverance, long suffering, contentment, quietness, reconciliation, humility, compassion, grace, and affection. Then we have the critical degrees of holiness. These 16 degrees are the keys to unlocking the full effects of holiness, allowing us to actualize each faculty and power. And these are reliance, transformation, purification, worship, acceptance, execution, commitment, determination, motivation, persuasion, surrender, communion, service, healing, forgiveness, and devotion. Last but not least, we have the primary degrees of holiness. These 16 degrees are the primary powers and faculties of the Spirit of Elohim, which empower us to acquire his set-apart nature. Therefore, by mastering these 16 degrees of holiness, we become holy as he is holy. And these are faith, obedience, virtue, reverential fear, knowledge, wisdom, temperance, endurance, patience, joy, peace, godliness, meekness, kindness, mercy, and love. And accumulation of power. Now, the final lesson I will share with you in this podcast is concerning the primary objectives of holiness. If you recall, there are three primary objectives of lawlessness. They are spiritual debility, instability, and fallibility. Per the image to the right, the bottom 1/3 of the mountain of lawlessness are degrees of debility. The middle 1/3 are degrees of instability, and the top 1/3 are degrees of fallibility. As you would expect, the primary objectives of holiness are counter to their corresponding objectives of lawlessness. To wit, they are complete opposites. Along these lines, the leading degrees of holiness are all degrees of power. Per the image to the left, these include faith, obedience, virtue, reverential fear, knowledge, and wisdom. These degrees are all counter to the degrees of debility within the mountain of lawlessness. To wit, whereas doubt through vanity are designed to make you spiritually weak, faith through wisdom are designed to make you spiritually strong. They lay a foundation for empowering you to do all things in accordance with the Father's will. Along these lines, faith is not only a degree of power, but it is also the leading degree of power. It is the foundation of the conglomeration of power deriving from the spirit of Elohim. Ergo, where there is no faith, there is no power. Remember that always as we continue these lessons and as you progress your campaign for everlasting life in the seal of Elohim. For as I have said before and often, we are career soldiers, and the only way we will survive and thrive in our profession is by accumulating great power and wielding it according to the Father's will, understanding that it is his desire that we are victorious in every occasion of spiritual warfare. And the beginning of this accumulation of power is our faith in the Most High Elohim and our persistent belief in his will. And should we succeed, we will unlock the next two objectives of holiness: enter, balance, and perfection. Per the image to the left, the degrees of balance are temperance, endurance, patience, joy, and peace. And the degrees of perfection are godliness, meekness, kindness, mercy, and love. No doubt, we will speak to those degrees and those objectives in future podcasts as we go on to the higher heights and deeper depths of holiness. For now, our focus must be on an accumulation of power, and said accumulation begins with us increasing our faith. Now, here is the final word. From now, it should be clear to see. When it comes to power, faith is the key. This is especially the case as it pertains to the operational nature of the seal of Elohim. Remember, the seal of Elohim is only functional via our proficiency in the Spirit, explicitly the 7 pillars of our faith. As you very well know by now, one of these pillars is power, a key pillar which is required for us to operate in all the other pillars. And as you learned today, the beginning of your accumulation of great power is your accumulation of great faith. And thus, your victory over lawlessness must be a matter you can conceive, for you may inherit any reality in accordance with the Father's will if you would only believe. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today, and as always, Ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the relationship between your spiritual power and your faith. Meditate on how effectual your prayers and your fasting are. Meditate on your levels of spiritual focus. Meditate on your ability to exert dominion and authority in the earth. And meditate on how dedicated you are to your spiritual craft. And then consider how much more effectual you would be in these orders if you increase your faith. My dear friends, you must believe me. It doesn't matter how effectual you are. There is always the opportunity to be more effectual. There is always the opportunity to grow. And that begins with you learning how to increase your faith to eliminate all doubts. Stay with me, and I will show you how. For by the Spirit, I will tell you what you need to know. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 336, an Intro to Faith, Part 2. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 338, an Intro to Faith, Part 3. I will post this podcast on Friday, September 13th, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch. Continue to pray. Continue in fasting. And most of all, continue to be focused. For the end is coming. The end is near.